They told my daughter I was dead. They took the millions I sent for her support and used it to buy sports cars and designer bags, while forcing my little girl to sleep in a freezing garage. I came home expecting to find a princess living in the castle I built for her. Instead, I found a frightened maid scrubbing the floors of my own house, terrified of the woman I trusted to protect her. I'm Robert Sterling, and when I walked up to my own front door after 15 years, dressed like a homeless man to surprise them, they made the biggest mistake of their lives. They didn't recognize the billionaire owner standing on their porch. They just saw someone they could abuse. But today, the game ends. Before we witness their downfall and the justice that follows, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and comment "Justice Serve" below if you believe that karma always finds a way. This is Inspiration Seeker, and this is my story. The wheels of the heavy jet screeched against the tarmac at JFK Airport, signaling the end of the longest commute of my life. 15 years. That's how long it had been since I last breathed the air in New York. Stepping out of the terminal, the chilly autumn wind hit my face, a stark contrast to the scorching, dry heat of the Middle Eastern deserts where I had spent the last decade and a half. I wasn't coming back as a tourist, and I certainly wasn't coming back empty-handed. But looking at me, you would never guess I had just cashed out on one of the largest private construction contracts in history. I caught my reflection in the glass door of a taxicab. The man staring back at me looked rough. My skin was leathery and deeply tanned from years of working under the relentless sun. My beard was thick, unkempt, and peppered with gray. I was wearing a faded flannel shirt, worn-out work boots, and jeans that had seen better days. To the average passerby, I looked like a drifter, maybe a manual laborer down on his luck. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I had deliberately chosen not to call ahead. No emails, no texts, no grand announcement. I wanted my return to be a complete surprise for my daughter, Emily. When I left, she was just a 7-year-old girl with missing front teeth and pigtails, crying as I boarded the plane. I promised her I would build her a kingdom. I promised her that her sacrifice of not having a father around would pay off in a life of absolute security and luxury. Sitting in the back of the yellow cab, watching the Manhattan skyline fade into the distance as we headed north toward Connecticut, my heart hammered against my ribs. I had sent money, so much money, back home every single month. I had set up a trust, bought a $4.5 million estate in Greenwich, and entrusted my new wife, Linda, to raise Emily as her own. In my mind, I pictured Emily now as a vibrant 22-year-old college graduate, perhaps running a charity or traveling the world, living safely in the beautiful mansion on the hill. I smiled, clutching my duffel bag. I was ready to finally be a dad again. I had no idea that I was driving straight into a nightmare. The cab driver kept eyeing me in the rearview mirror as we wound our way through the pristine streets of Greenwich. I couldn't blame him. With every mile we drove, the houses got bigger, the fences got higher, and the cars got more expensive. And there I was, sitting in the back seat looking like I had just walked off construction site, instructing him to drive to one of the most exclusive addresses in the state. "You sure this is the right place, pal?" the driver asked, slowing down as we approached the massive wrought iron gates at the end of a long, tree-lined driveway. "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steady, though my stomach was doing flip-flops. "Just drop me right here." I handed him a crisp $100 bill, telling him to keep the change. He looked at the money, then back at me, shrugged, and sped off, leaving me standing alone at the entrance of my own estate. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and expensive landscaping. The house was magnificent. It was a sprawling Georgian colonial masterpiece that sat atop a gentle hill, overlooking the valley. I had bought this place through a blind trust right before I left the country, signing the papers in a rush so Linda and Emily would have a safe haven while I was gone. Seeing it now in person brought a lump to my throat. The white pillars were pristine. The lawn was manicured to perfection, like a green carpet rolled out just for royalty, and the windows sparkled in the afternoon sun. I walked up the long driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel. I noticed the cars parked near the fountain. There was a brand-new Range Rover and a sleek, convertible Porsche. I couldn't help but smile. I imagined Emily driving that convertible, her hair blowing in the wind, living the carefree life I never had. I thought about Linda, grateful that she had managed the household so well with the funds I provided. Every callus on my hands, every lonely night in the desert, felt worth it in that moment. I was the provider. I was the father who had secured their future. I walked toward the massive oak front doors, adjusting my duffel bag, blissfully unaware that the luxury I was admiring was a fortress built on lies. I stood on the porch, smoothing down my flannel shirt, trying to make myself look presentable despite the travel grime. I reached out and lifted the heavy brass knocker, letting it fall against the wood with a solid, echoing thud. My heart was pounding in my ears, louder than the noise of the knocker. I prepared my smile, rehearsing the words, "I'm home," in my head. I expected Linda to open the door, perhaps looking a bit older but elegant, or maybe Emily herself, rushing into my arms. The door clicked and swung open slowly. But there was no elegance, and there was certainly no joy. Standing in the doorway was a young woman, frail and gaunt. She was wearing a shapeless, gray maid's uniform that hung loosely off her thin frame. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her hands were red and chapped, clutching a dirty rag. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She took one look at my dirty boots and my unkempt beard, and her expression shifted instantly to fear. She didn't see a father. She saw a threat. She saw a vagrant. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She cast a nervous glance over her shoulder back into the house. "We don't accept solicitors, and we don't have any cash for donations. Please, you have to leave. The madam, she'll be very angry if she finds you here." I couldn't speak. The air had been sucked right out of my lungs. I stared at her, my eyes tracing the familiar curve of her jaw and the specific shade of blue in her eyes. My mother's eyes. Then my gaze fell to her neck. There, resting against the cheap fabric of her uniform, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It was the exact one I had given my daughter at the airport 15 years ago. My knees almost gave out. This wasn't a hired servant. This was Emily, my little girl. She was standing in the doorway of the mansion I bought for her, dressed in rags, afraid of her own shadow. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the gut. She didn't recognize me. To her, I was just a homeless man interrupting her chores. Before I could even choke out her name, I heard the sharp click of high heels approaching rapidly from the marble hallway inside. "What is taking so long, you useless girl? I told you to keep the door shut to the riffraff." The voice was sharp, cutting through the humid air like a knife. Linda appeared behind Emily, practically shoving my daughter aside into the wall. She stepped into the light, and the contrast between her and Emily was sickening. Linda looked expensive. She was draped in a silk designer kimono that probably cost more than most people's cars, with diamonds glittering on her manicured fingers. Time had been kind to her face, likely thanks to expensive treatments, but it hadn't softened her eyes. They were cold, calculating, and filled with disdain. She scanned me up and down, her nose wrinkling as if she smelled something rotting. I braced myself with the shock of recognition for her to gasp, "Robert," and drop to her knees. But nothing happened. She looked right through me. To a woman like Linda, a man in a dirty flannel shirt and work boots wasn't a person. He was just background noise. She didn't see her husband. She saw debris. "Well," she snapped, crossing her arms impatiently, "don't just stand there like an idiot staring at me. The landscaping agency said you'd be here by noon. You're 2 hours late." I blinked, momentarily confused. Then it clicked. She thought I was a temporary day laborer she had hired to clean the yard. My fists clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. The urge to scream was overwhelming. I wanted to tell her I owned the ground she was standing on. I wanted a man to know why my daughter looked like a skeleton while she looked like a queen. But then I looked at Emily, cowering in the shadow of the doorframe, terrified of this woman. If I reveal myself now, Linda would instantly switch masks. She would cry, she would lie, and she would put on a performance. I wouldn't get the truth. I needed to see exactly who she was when she thought no one mattered was watching. I forced my hands to relax. I lowered my head, hiding the fire burning in my eyes. "Sorry, ma'am. I mumbled, affecting a rougher, subservient voice. The bus broke down. I don't care about your excuses, Linda scoffed, throwing a pair of dirty gardening gloves at my feet. Clean up the backyard. The leaves are a mess, and the pool area needs scrubbing. And don't expect a full day's pay for half a day's work. Now move, before I call the agency and have you fired. I slowly bent down and picked up the gloves. Yes, ma'am, I said quietly. I turned and walked toward the side gate, swallowing my rage. She had just invited the judge, jury, and executioner into her home, and she didn't even know it. The backyard was just as opulent as the front, a private paradise hidden from the world. An infinity pool shimmered in the sunlight, surrounded by imported Italian lounge chairs and a cabana that looked bigger than my first apartment. But as I started raking the fallen oak leaves near the hedges, the beauty of the scenery was quickly ruined by the ugliness of the people inhabiting it. 2 young adults strolled out onto the patio, laughing loudly. It was Chad and Tiffany, Linda's children from her previous marriage. I remembered them as bratty toddlers, but they had grown into entitled monsters. Chad was wearing a tennis outfit that looked brand new, and Tiffany was glued to her phone, complaining about the weak Wi-Fi signal by the pool. They sat down, treating the place like they were royalty. Hey, you! Chad shouted, not at me, but toward the house. The back door creaked open, and Emily stepped out. She was struggling to balance a heavy tray, loaded with iced coffees and snacks. Her arms shook under the weight, her knuckles white. As she approached them, she moved with a terrified hesitation, like a dog that's been kicked too many times. Finally, Tiffany sneered, not even looking up from her screen. Did you grow the coffee beans yourself? Why are you so slow? I'm sorry, Tiffany, Emily whispered, lowering the tray onto the glass table. The ice machine was jammed. Excuses, always excuses. Chad laughed. He reached for a bag of chips, ripped it open, and deliberately poured a handful onto the pristine patio floor. He looked at Emily with a cruel smirk. Oops, my bad. Looks like you missed a spot cleaning earlier. Cinderella, pick it up. I froze, gripping the handle of the rake, so hard the wood creaked. I watched from behind the rhododendron bush as my daughter, the heir to my fortune, knelt on the concrete. She began picking up the chips one by one, while her step-siblings laughed and snapped pictures of her, probably to post on social media for their friends' amusement. They called her the help, the leech, and pathetic. My blood didn't just boil, it evaporated. Every fiber of my being screamed to charge across that lawn, tackle Chad into the pool, and throw them both off my property. But I forced myself to stay rooted to the spot. I needed to see how deep the rot went. If I reacted now, it would just be an angry gardener shouting at rich kids. I needed to be the judge bringing down the gavel. So I kept raking, turning my face away so they wouldn't see the tears of rage forming in my eyes. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black, my back was aching and my hands were blistered. I walked to the back door to ask for my pay, intending to find a hotel and plan my next move. But Linda had other ideas. She opened the door a crack, handed me a stale sandwich wrapped in a napkin like I was a stray dog. It's too late to process a payment now, she said dismissively. And the front hedges still look like garbage. You can sleep in the tool shed out back. Start again at 5 a.m. sharp. If you're not there, you don't get a dime. Before I could protest, she slammed the door and locked it. The lights in the main house flickered on, warm and inviting, casting long shadows across the yard where I stood in the cold. I didn't go to the tool shed. I waited. I watched as the upstairs bedroom lights turned off one by one. Once the house was silent, I crept out of the shadows. I needed to find Emily. I knew she wasn't in the main house. I had seen the way they treated her. She wasn't family to them. She was livestock. I moved toward the detached 3-car garage. A faint, flickering light was coming from a small side window. I approached quietly, my boots making no sound on the damp grass, and peered through the grime-coated glass. What I saw shattered whatever was left of my heart. The garage was filled with luxury vehicles. Chad's Porsche, Linda's Mercedes, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But in the far corner, Squeezed between a stack of winter tires and a lawnmower was a tiny, makeshift living space. There was no insulation, no heating, just a thin, dirty mattress on the concrete floor. Emily was sitting there, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that looked like it belonged to a moving company. She was shivering. It was 40 degrees out, and my daughter was sleeping next to the exhaust pipes of cars bought with my money. She wasn't sleeping, though. She was holding something close to the faint light of a camping lantern. I squinted to see what it was. It was a photograph, a torn, faded photograph of me, taken right before I left. She pressed it to her chest, rocking back and forth, whispering something to the empty, freezing air. She was praying to a ghost, while her father stood just 10 feet away, alive and burning with a vengeance that was about to consume this entire estate. Morning came with the roar of an engine. At 9 a.m. sharp, Linda peeled out of the driveway in her Mercedes, likely heading to the city to spend another few $1,000s of my money on things she didn't need. The moment the iron gates closed behind her, the tension on the property seemed to lift just a fraction. This was my chance. I found Emily in the driveway, bucket in hand, washing Chad's Porsche. The water was freezing, and her hands were red and raw. But she was scrubbing the rims with a toothbrush, focused intently on removing every speck of dust. I walked over slowly, making sure not to startle her. I grabbed a dry towel and started drying the hood of the car next to her. "You shouldn't be doing this without gloves," I said gently, my voice low. She jumped, looking up with wide, fearful eyes. "It's okay," she stammered, dipping her head back down. "I'm used to it. If I don't get the break dust off Chad gets upset." I paused, leaning against the fender. "You're a young woman. You should be in college or out with friends. Why are you working here like this? Where are your parents?" She stopped scrubbing. A shadow passed over her face, a look of profound sadness that made her look 10 years older. She wrung out the sponge, staring into the soapy water. "My mom died when I was little," she said softly. "And my dad, he was a hero. He went overseas to build things, to make a better life for us." Her voice cracked. "But he died in a construction accident 10 years ago. A scaffolding collapse in Dubai." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dead?" I was standing right there. "Mrs. Linda told me everything," Emily continued, wiping a tear from her cheek with her wet forearm. "She said there was no insurance money. She said my dad actually left us with huge gambling debts. She was kind enough to take me in, to give me a roof over my head, even though I'm a burden. So I worked to pay back what he owed. It's the least I can do to honor his memory." I had to grip the side mirror of the car to keep from falling over. It wasn't just greed. It was psychological warfare. Linda hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen my daughter's memory of me. She had turned me from a provider into a deadbeat who left his child with debt. Emily wasn't staying here because she was forced physically. She was staying because she was shackled by guilt and gratitude for a lie. "He didn't leave you with debt, Emily," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion I could barely suppress. She looked at me, confused. "What?" "Nothing," I said, straightening up and turning away before I broke down completely. "Just make sure you dry the mirrors. No streaks." I walked away toward the back of the house. The time for observation was over. Linda had buried me alive in my daughter's mind. Now, I was to dig myself out. I excused myself in the yard work, muttering something about needing to use the facilities, and walked briskly down the long driveway toward the main road. I found a small gas station about a half-mile away. I locked myself in a single-stall bathroom, the smell of bleach and old oil filling my nose, and unzipped the hidden lining of my duffel bag. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, calculated rage. I pulled out my satellite phone, a heavy-duty military-grade device that was my only link to the outside world during my years in the desert. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered on the other end. "Law offices of James Sterling and Associates. How may I direct your call?" "James," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "It's Robert." There was a stunned silence on the line. James wasn't just my lawyer. He was my cousin, and the only person in the States who knew the extent of my wealth. Robert? My God, you're actually back? We weren't expecting you for another week. Where are you? Should I send a car? I'm in Greenwich. I cut him off, but I'm not in the house. I'm outside looking in, and James, who I'm seeing, is criminal. I quickly explained everything. The maid uniform, the garage, the lie about my death, the debt Emily was paying off. As I spoke, I could hear James gasping on the other end, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Robert, that's fraud. That's child endangerment. That's evil. Linda has been cashing your checks every month, signing documents claiming Emily was thriving in private school. I know, I said, gripping the phone so tight I thought the plastic would crack. And I wanted to end. Now! Say the word, James said, his voice hardening. I can have the police there in 10 minutes. No, I replied. Police are too easy. She humiliated my daughter for 10 years. I want to humiliate her for the rest of her life. I want you to freeze everything. Her credit cards, the bank accounts, the trust access. Cut it all off, but don't alert her yet. And I need you to bring the original deed to the house. The one that proves who actually owns the dirt she stands on. Consider it done, James said. What's the plan? She's throwing a party tomorrow night, I said, staring at my reflection in the dirty bathroom mirror. The man looking back wasn't a gardener anymore. He was a shark smelling blood. And I think it's time the true host made an appearance. I made my way back onto the estate, slipping through a gap in the hedges just as a catering van pulled into the driveway. The house was buzzing with activity. Florists were carrying in massive arrangements of white lilies, and a team of event planners was shouting instructions about lighting and seating charts. I blended into the background, grabbing a rake and pretending to work near the open French doors of the sunroom. Through the screen, I could hear Linda's voice, shrill and excited. She was on the phone, but she was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Yes, of course, Senator. It's going to be the event of the season. Tiffany is so thrilled about the engagement. We've spared no expense. Only the best for our future son-in-law. I paused. So that was it. A gala dinner to celebrate Tiffany's engagement to a senator's son. Linda was using my money to buy her way into a political dynasty. She hung up the phone, and I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she walked over to where Tiffany was lounging. Mom, seriously, Tiffany whined. What are we going to do about her tomorrow? I don't want that scarecrow ruining my pictures. Can't we just lock her in the basement? Don't be dramatic, Tiff, Linda sighed, the sound of ice clinking into a glass following her words. We need the free labor. The catering staff is expensive enough. Emily will serve the appetizers, keep her head down, and stay out of the way. But don't worry, darling. This is the last time you'll have to look at her. I stopped raking. The air went still. What do you mean? Tiffany asked. I'm listing the house on Monday, Linda announced casually, as if she were talking about selling an old purse. The market is high. We'll take the cash, move to the Hamptons, and start fresh. As for Emily, well, she's an adult now. I've supported her long enough. She can go to a homeless shelter for all I care. She's dead weight. My grip on the rake tightened until my knuckles turned white. They were planning to sell my house, the home I built specifically for Emily, and toss my daughter onto the street like a bag of trash. Linda wasn't just evil. She was a parasite preparing to migrate to a new host. Does she know? Tiffany giggled. Of course not, Linda laughed, a cold, dry sound. I'll tell her on Monday when I change the locks. Let her enjoy one last night of servitude. I stared at the ground, a dark smile forming on my face. Linda was right about one thing. Monday, the locks would be changed. But she had no idea which side of the door she was going to be on. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long, orange shadows across the estate, but the tension in the air was hotter than high noon. The dress rehearsal for the gala was in full swing. Tiffany had decided to try on her custom-made silk gown, a sleek, white number that she proudly announced cost more than a year of college tuition. She was parading around the patio, glass of Merlot in hand, practicing her poses for paparazzi that would inevitably be there tomorrow. Emily was nearby, silently sweeping the stone pavers, trying to make herself invisible. I was tending the flower beds just a few feet away, my back turned to them, but my ears tuned to every frequency. Ugh! This light is terrible for selfies, Tiffany complained, spinning around dramatically to find a better angle. In her vanity-fueled twirl, she didn't watch where she was going. She clipped the edge of a patio chair and stumbled. The glass of red wine flew from her hand, splashing squarely onto the front of her pristine white dress. The crimson stain spread instantly, looking like a gunshot wound in expensive fabric. For a second, there was silence. Then Tiffany screamed, a sound so high-pitched it probably shattered glass in the next county. "You idiot!" she shrieked, whirling around to face Emily, who was 5 feet away and hadn't even touched her. "You tripped me with that broom. Look what you did." Linda stormed out of the house, her heels clacking like gunfire. She saw the dress, saw the wine, and her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look for logic. She just needed a target. "You clumsy, ungrateful little wretch." Linda shouted, marching up to Emily. Before I could even shout a warning, Linda raised her hand and delivered a sharp, cracking slap across Emily's face. The force of it knocked my daughter to the ground. Emily didn't fight back. She just curled into a ball, shielding her head, anticipating more. My vision went red. A primal roar built up in my chest. I gripped the handle of the metal spade I was holding so tightly that the wood splintered into my palm. I took a step forward, fully intending to swing that spade and take Linda's head off. I wanted to end her right there on the patio. But I stopped. I froze, my boots heavy on the grass. Violence would get me arrested. Violence would give them a victim narrative. No, ending them privately was enough. People like Linda and Tiffany didn't fear pain. They feared irrelevance. They feared public shame. I watched Emily scramble up and run to the garage, sobbing. I took a deep breath, forcing the monster inside me back into its cage. Let them have their victory today, I thought, my eyes locking onto Linda's smug face. Because tomorrow, I'm going to destroy them in front of everyone they've ever tried to impress. I didn't go back to the tool shed that night. I didn't wait for permission to leave, and I certainly didn't wait for my $60 in back pay. Under cover of darkness, I slipped out the side gate, leaving the gardener identity behind in the dirt. I walked down the quiet suburban road until I flagged down a passing car to take me to the train station. An hour later, I was standing in the lobby of the Four Seasons in Manhattan. I still looked like a wreck, flannel shirt stained with sweat, boots caked in mud. The concierge looked ready to call security the moment I stepped onto the polished marble floors. But before he could reach for his radio, I pulled a sleek, black titanium credit card from my pocket and slid it across the counter. "Penthouse suite," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "And I need your best barber sent up immediately." The concierge glanced at the name on the card, and his eyes widened. The attitude shifted instantly from suspicion to subservience. "Right away, Mr. Sterling." Up in the suite, overlooking the city lights that seemed to burn with the same intensity as my anger, I began the ritual. I stood under the scalding hot shower for 40 minutes, scrubbing away the grime of the last 2 days. I washed off the dirt, but I couldn't wash off the memory of Emily's tears. That would require a different kind of cleansing. When the barber arrived, I sat in the leather chair and watched the transformation in the mirror. The scruffy, graying beard fell away in clumps, revealing a jawline set in stone. The shaggy, unkempt hair was trimmed into a sharp, executive cut. Slowly, the drifter faded and the tycoon reemerged. I walked to the closet where James had delivered my luggage. I pulled out the garment bag and unzipped it. Inside was a bespoke, charcoal gray Tom Ford 3-piece suit, tailored to the millimeter. I put it on, fastened the cufflinks, adjusting the silk tie, and sliding my Patek Philippe watch onto my wrist. I looked in the full-length mirror. The man staring back wasn't a desperate father anymore. He was a shark in a suit. He was power. He was consequence. I straightened my lapels and stared into my own eyes. Showtime, I whispered. Robert Sterling was officially back from the dead, and he was ready to raise hell. The night of the gala arrived, transforming my quiet estate into a carnival of vanity. From the tinted back window of the lead vehicle of my convoy, I watched the spectacle unfold. The driveway was a river of headlights as limousines and high-end sports cars deposited the creme de la creme of Connecticut society at the front steps. The house itself was ablaze with light, every window glowing golden against the night sky, while a string quartet played soft classical music on the lawn. It was a beautiful picture, painted over a canvas of cruelty. Inside that house, I knew Emily was currently weaving through the crowd, carrying heavy trays of hors d'oeuvres, invisible to the people she was serving. They would see a uniform. I saw a prisoner of war. Linda and Tiffany would be holding court in the center of the room, soaking up the adoration, drinking champagne paid for by the dead husband they despised. "Are you ready for this, Robert?" James asked, sitting beside me in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom. He looked nervous, clutching the leather briefcase that contained the documents that would detonate Linda's life. "I've never been more ready," I replied, adjusting my cuffs. "Let's go." Our driver bypassed a line of valets, pulling the massive black car right up to the red carpet at the entrance. A confused valet rushed over, likely about to tell us to move, but he froze when a security detail from the trailing SUV stepped out. Two large men in dark suits with earpieces, ex-federal marshals I had hired for the evening. They opened my door with synchronized precision. I stepped out onto the gravel. The air was crisp, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the adrenaline. I buttoned my jacket, the flash of cameras from the hired paparazzi flickering nearby. They didn't know who I was yet, but they sensed money. They sensed power. I wasn't the hunched-over gardener anymore. I stood tall, projecting an aura of absolute authority. Distinct, isn't it? I murmured to James as we walked up the steps, the security team clearing a path for us. "What is?" he asked. "The smell of impending doom," I said, my eyes locked on the front door. "It smells like expensive perfume and fear." We didn't knock. The heavy oak doors were wide open to welcome the guests. I walked across the threshold, my polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble foyer, stepping into the lion's den not as a victim, but as the hunter. Walking into the grand hall was like stepping into a different dimension. The last time I was in this room, 48 hours ago, I was being yelled at for tracking mud onto the floor. Now, as I strode in wearing a $5,000 suit, the room seemed to bend around me. The chatter of the socialites died down, rippling into silence as heads turned. In a room full of people desperate to be noticed, true power has a way of sucking the oxygen right out of the air. I scanned the crowd. There were politicians, local celebrities, and business tycoons, all sipping champagne and laughing, completely oblivious of the tragedy unfolding in the garage outside. And there, in the center of it all, was Linda. She was holding court near the grand piano, laughing at a joke made by the senator. When she noticed the hush falling over the room, she turned. Her eyes landed on me, and I saw the calculation happen in real time. She didn't see her husband. She didn't see the father of her stepdaughter. She saw the bespoke suit, the Patek Philippe watch, and the security detail flanking me. To a predator like Linda, I was just fresh meat. She excused herself from the senator and glided toward me, a practiced, charming smile plastered on her face. She reached out a manicured hand, her voice dripping with honey. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she purred, looking me up and down with hungry eyes. "I'm Linda, the owner of this beautiful home. And you are—" I took her hand, resisting the urge to crush it. Her skin was soft, a stark contrast to the calloused hands of the girl she had scrubbing her floors. "Sterling," I said, my voice low and devoid of warmth. "I heard through private channels that this estate might be coming on the market soon. I decided to come see if it lives up to the hype." Linda's eyes lit up like slot machines hitting a jackpot. She didn't even register the last name. She was too blinded by the prospect of a sale. She laughed, a tinkling artificial sound. "Oh, you are very well informed, Mr. Sterling. It is indeed. In fact, for the right buyer, I could be persuaded to give a private tour right now." She stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm, her fingers brushing against my sleeve flirtatiously. It took every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. "Please grab a drink. Make yourself at home," she whispered. "I assure you, I can be very accommodating." "I'm sure you can," I replied, scanning the room over her shoulder. "But first, I'm thirsty, and I'd like one of your servers to bring me a specific vintage." I spotted the kitchen door swing open. A terrified figure in a black and white uniform emerged, keeping her head down. It was Emily. "That one," I pointed, gesturing toward the young woman navigating through the throng of tuxedoed men and bejeweled women. Linda frowned, her perfect smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She glanced at Emily, who was struggling to balance a silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes. "Oh, you don't want her," Linda laughed dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "She's a help, and frankly, she's a bit slow. I'll have the head caterer bring you a fresh bottle." "No," I said, my voice cutting to the noise like a razor. "I want a drink from her." Linda looked confused, but she wasn't about to argue with a potential buyer. She snapped her fingers aggressively. "You come here immediately." Emily flinched. She turned slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor, terrified of making a mistake. As she approached us, the chatter in the immediate circle died down. People sensed the tension. They watched as a clumsy maid walked up to mysterious billionaire and the hostess. Her hands were shaking so badly that the glasses on the tray chimed against each other. "Don't drop anything, you clumsy girl," Linda hissed under her breath, a smile still plastered on her face of the guest, but her eyes shooting daggers at Emily. "This is a very important guest. Don't embarrass me." Emily stopped in front of me. She didn't look up. She just held out the tray, her knuckles white. I reached out, but I didn't take a glass. Instead, I gently placed my hand under the tray to steady it. "Look at me," I said softly. Emily froze. She knew that voice. It was a voice from her childhood, a voice she thought was buried in a desert grave. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. Her eyes met mine. For a moment, there was confusion, then shock, and finally, a dawn of recognition that broke through 10 years of grief. "Dad," she whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. The glass tray tipped. A few flutes slid off and shattered on the marble floor with a loud crash. The entire room went silent. Linda gasped, seizing the moment to play the victim. "Oh my God! I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling." She turned on Emily, grabbing her by the arm. "Get out. I told you she was unstable. She's crazy. She thinks every man she sees is her dead father. It's pathetic, really." Linda laughed nervously, looking around at the guests for support. "Ignore her. She's just a delirious little servant." I didn't break eye contact with Emily. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile for the first time in days. "She's not delirious, Linda," I said, my voice booming across the silent hall. "And she's not a servant." I reached out and grabbed Linda's wrist, forcing her to release her grip on Emily's arm. I didn't squeeze hard, but the message was clear. I pulled Emily behind me, shielding her with my body, placing myself between her and the woman who had tormented her for a decade. "Get your hands off my daughter," I snarled, my voice low and dangerous. Linda stumbled back, rubbing her wrist, her eyes darting between me and the confused guests. "Excuse me? Your daughter? Robert Sterling is dead. He died in a hole in the desert. You're just some imposter trying to cause a scene." I straightened my jacket and turned to face the room. The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet. "I look pretty alive for a ghost, don't I, Linda?" I said, my voice projecting to the back of the hall. "My name is Robert Sterling. I didn't die. I was working to build a future for this family. A future you stole." I signaled to James. My lawyer stepped forward, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of documents. He handed a blue folder directly to Linda. "These are the original deeds to the house," James announced, his voice carrying the weight of the law. "And inside, you will also find a warrant for your arrest. Forensic accounting shows you embezzled over $3 million from the trust fund, falsified death certificates, and committed gross negligence in the care of a minor. Linda's face went pale. The glass of champagne she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered, mirroring the destruction of her carefully constructed life. No, Robert, please. I can explain. I did it for us. I was protecting her. You were protecting yourself. I cut her off. At that moment, the heavy front doors swung open again. But this time, it wasn't a guest. It was the Greenwich Police Department. 2 officers marched in, flanked by a detective. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. As they clicked the handcuffs onto Linda's wrists, she began to scream, thrashing and blaming everyone but herself. Tiffany and Chad tried to sneak out the back, but security stopped them at the door. I didn't watch them leave. I turned around and looked at Emily. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face, still unable to believe what was happening. "Is it really you?" she choked out. "It's me, sweetheart," I whispered, opening my arms. "I'm home, and I'm never leaving again." She collapsed into my chest, sobbing. I held her tight, feeling the years of distance melt away. The house was finally ours again. The parasites were gone. As I held my daughter in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the wreckage of a fake party, I knew the real work was just beginning, healing the wounds money couldn't fix. But for the first time in 15 years, we were safe. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered by hand. It has been 6 months since the sirens faded from our driveway, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I have ever heard. The house feels different now. We stripped away the pretentious gold statues, the cold marble statues, and Linda's ghost. We sold the flashy sports cars and donated the designer clothes to charity. The estate doesn't look like a museum for the elite anymore. For the first time, it actually feels like a home. As for the royal family that used to terrorize these halls, justice was thorough. Linda is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal correctional facility for fraud, embezzlement, and child endangerment. Her assets were seized, and her reputation is in tatters. And her children, Chad and Tiffany, well, the real world hit them hard. Without the cushion in my bank account, they had to learn the value of $1 the hard way. The last I heard, Chad was washing dishes at a diner in New Jersey, and Tiffany was working retail. It turns out karma doesn't miss. But the real victory isn't their punishment. It is my daughter's healing. It hasn't been easy. You don't erase 10 years of trauma overnight. There are still days when she flinches at loud noises or apologizes for things that aren't her fault. But every day, she gets a little stronger. She's back in college now, studying art history, a passion she was forced to suppress for years. I'm sitting on the back porch now, watching the sun come up over the valley. Emily is sitting next to me, wrapped in a warm blanket, sketching in her notebook. She looks up and smiles, a genuine bright smile that reaches her eyes. The fear is gone. I spent 15 years overseas thinking that providing money was the most important thing a father could do. I thought I was building a kingdom for her. But I learned the hard way that a castle, without love, is just a prison. She didn't need the millions. She just needed her dad. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows she'll never be alone again. They say that money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly buy justice if you use it right. Linda thought she could erase me and enslave my daughter, but she forgot one thing. A father's love is the most powerful force on earth. We took back our lives, not with violence, but with truth. If this story of redemption and karma satisfied you, please hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with more people. Make sure to subscribe to Inspiration Seeker and click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. And I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think Linda's children, Chad and Tiffany, deserve to be punished too, or were they just victims of their mother's bad parenting? Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, no matter how dark the night gets, the sun always rises. See you in the next story.